It was a late Friday night, the kind where the shadows outside felt thicker, like they were watching. My parents and I gathered in the living room, as we did for family bonding, though it was more like being in the same space while pretending to be alone. I sat in the corner of the couch, scrolling through social media, the glow of my phone the only real light in the dim room. Dad reclined in his chair, eyes half closed, with a beer can teetering on the edge of a box beside him. The sour, heavy stench of alcohol hung in the air, making me feel queasy. Across from me, Mom was a silent figure, her knitting needles clicking rhythmically, crafting another scarf for her endless collection of craft sales. It was a dull, lifeless night. The TV flickered on the news, the usual chatter filling the silence like static. Boredom wrapped itself around us, suffocating and thick. Suddenly, the TV blared a loud, jarringly upbeat commercial tune, breaking the tension of the room like a scream in the dark. My heart jumped and my phone slipped a little from my hands. The voice on the screen boomed, tired of using knives that just won't cut. But there was something wrong. The voice was too deep, like it had been slowed down or distorted. I glanced up, squinting at the TV. The people in the ad were strange black bags over their heads, their movements jerky, struggling to slice through vegetables. It felt wrong, like a twisted mockery of something familiar. I lowered my phone, staring at the screen. My mom had stopped knitting, her eyes wide as she stared too. Dad stirred in his chair, grunting as he forced his eyes open. We all watched in horrified silence as the scene unfolded. A man in a red polo and black pants stepped into view. His face was hidden behind a grotesque mask plastered with a fake mustache and hollow, empty eyes that seemed to swallow the light. His voice was too cheerful as he held up a large cake knife in one hand and a butcher's knife in the other. "I'm here to show you the amazing power of the serral blades," he announced, almost gleeful. The camera panned, and the room seemed to chill as it revealed 5 hooded figures kneeling in a row. Their hands were bound behind them, and they were eerily still. The man in the mask moved toward the first one, ripping the bag from the figure's head. I froze. It was Bobby Richards, his face streaked with tears, his mouth gagged. Bobby, my classmate. Bobby, who I went to church with. A kid who always got straight A's, a good Christian boy. My mom let out a strangled gasp, and Dad shot upright, his eyes wide and unblinking, sweat beading on his forehead. As the man held the knife closer to Bobby's neck, a number flashed on the screen. "Call now if you'd like to order this amazing kitchen knife," the voice intoned, completely detached from the horror unfolding. I fumbled with the remote, desperately pressing the channel button, but it was no use. Every time I tried to change the station, the same twisted commercial played. My fingers shook as the clock on the screen began to count down. 59, 58, 56. Bobby's sobs grew louder, more frantic. My chest tightened as the timer ticked down. The man was inches from Bobby now, the blade reflecting the dull light. My mom stared, her eyes wide, frozen in place. Dad was on the edge of his seat, silent, his breath shallow. The clock hit 29 when the man in the mask suddenly grinned, a grotesque grin that twisted the features of the mask. "Looks like we have a buyer," he said, a sickeningly sweet tone in his voice. Bobby was dragged off screen, leaving behind only the sound of his muffled cries. The man moved to the next victim, his movements slow and deliberate. He tore the bag from her head, revealing Jenna Reynolds, student body president, the girl everyone knew. My breath caught in my throat. Jenna's eyes were wide with terror as she stared into the camera, her face pale, streaked with sweat. "Call in the next 20 seconds to order this amazing steak fork." The man sang out, holding the sharp utensil to Jenna's face. The clock started again, ticking down from 20. I raised my phone, my hands trembling, ready to call, to do something. But before I could, my mom snatched it from my hands. "Are you crazy?" she hissed, her voice low, almost feral. "You want to risk our lives for hers?" Her words hit me like ice water. This woman, the one who was always so kind, so caring, was willing to let Jenna die. I stared at her in disbelief. The clock hit 0. No buyers? Well, let me show you just how effective this steak fork can be, the man said, his voice dripping with mock excitement. I watched, helpless, as he slowly pressed the fork into Jenna's cheek. Her scream cut through the room like a knife, echoing in my ears, vibrating in my bones. Blood poured down her face, pooling on the floor as she squirmed in pain. Her eyes rolled back, white and lifeless, as her body went limp. The man yanked the fork from her skull, and with a dull thud, Jenna crumpled to the ground, motionless, a pool of blood spreading beneath her. The commercial continued, the timer reset, but I couldn't look anymore. The room was suffocating, the walls closing in as the nightmare on the screen refused to end. My father bolted from the room, his face twisted in horror as he barely made it to the kitchen, retching into the sink. My mother sat on the couch, her body trembling, hands pressed against her face as sobs racked her frame. She tried to stifle them, as if hiding from the nightmare unfolding on the screen would make it less real. But I was frozen, utterly paralyzed, staring in disbelief at the carnage I had just witnessed. It had to be a nightmare. There was no way this could be real, no way. The man on the screen, his grotesque mask stained with the blood of his latest victim, casually wiped his blade with a rag. He turned to the camera, his voice eerily calm, as if selling kitchen tools on a bright Saturday morning. "Remember, folks," he said, his voice oozing with fake enthusiasm, "these can be ordered again at the end of the commercial. If you're finally convinced you want this product, just give us a call." With that, he stepped towards the third victim, a dark shadow looming over another helpless soul. "Our next tool is this marvelous steak knife," he said, holding up the blade. "See how evenly the teeth are lined up. Perfect for a nice clean cut." I swallowed hard as he removed the next hood, revealing the face of 16-year-old Andrew Jacobs. My heart sank. Andrew had always been quiet, a loner who kept to himself after losing both of his parents in a tragic car accident. I remembered how he'd sit in the corner at lunch, doodling in his notebook, lost in his own world. He was misunderstood, a quiet, creative kid who never quite fit in. But now, his face was a mask of despair, his eyes lifeless and hollow, as if he had already accepted his fate. He didn't struggle. He didn't scream. He simply stared at the floor, broken. The man rubbed his fingers over the serrated teeth of the knife, his voice dripping with malice. "This item is very limited, folks. Only a few in stock, so call in the next 10 seconds to claim one of these beauties." He gripped the knife tightly, holding it up to the camera as the countdown began. 10, 9, 8. I wanted to scream, to run, to do anything, but I couldn't. I was rooted to the spot, my body shaking, my stomach twisting into knots. The clock reached 0. "Well then," the man said, his voice smooth and icy, "let me show you how clean this cut can be." He grabbed Andrew by the hair, yanking his head back. The knife gleamed in the flickering light as the man slowly, methodically, dragged the blade across Andrew's throat. Blood poured from the wound, a torrent of red staining the floor beneath him. The man sawed back and forth, the serrated teeth tearing through flesh and muscle with sickening precision. Andrew's head rolled to the side, his lifeless eyes staring directly at me, as his body collapsed into the growing pool of blood. The man held the severed head aloft, showcasing it like a trophy. "Now, just look at that clean cut, folks," he said, grinning behind his mask, blood dripping from the dismembered head. The sight was too much. I felt my stomach churn violently, and before I could stop it, I vomited onto the floor. My mother, pale as death itself, was speechless, her eyes wide and vacant. But the man wasn't finished. He moved to the fourth victim, yanking off their hood with brutal force. There, kneeling in front of him, was Trevor Jackson, the high school football quarterback. Trevor, the tough guy everyone looked up to, had been crying. His cheeks were streaked with tears. A look of desperate defiance etched across his face. The man brandished a massive butcher's knife, holding it up to the camera like he was about to butcher livestock. The number flashed again, and the clock started counting down from 10. This time, before I could even blink, the phone rang. Trevor was dragged off screen, saved by some unseen caller. But the masked man wasn't done yet. He moved toward the final victim. My heart was pounding so hard, I thought it would explode. The man slowly removed the last hood, and my blood ran cold. There, tied and trembling, was Julia Myers. Julia, the girl I'd had a crush on since preschool. She was kind, gentle, her voice always soft and comforting. I had never worked up the courage to tell her how I felt, and now it was too late. Above her head, suspended from a wire, dangled a set of gleaming kitchen knives like a twisted modern-day guillotine. The man stepped behind her, his voice lowering to a whisper, almost seductive in its malice. Our final offer, folks, is a very special set of knives. Available for the next 5 seconds. Call now and don't miss your chance. The clock started ticking and I snapped. I shoved my mom aside, grabbing the phone with shaking hands. My fingers flew over the numbers as the timer ticked down. 5, 4, 3. I hit the call button, my heart racing. Just as the timer hit 1, the phone rang on the screen. The man's head tilted slightly, and from the other end of the line, a voice whispered, "We are coming." I dropped the phone, my entire body trembling uncontrollably. My mother's face was a ghostly mask of fear. I don't know what happened to the others. I don't know what will happen to us, ... But whatever you do, please don't buy from Cyril Blades.